I understand that adults and the adult world and what adults have created, whole society, most of it is flawed in a variety of different ways, but still it has some good stuff to offer you. One of them is this. Not that, unlike my colleague here, it doesn't have much to offer you, but except to give you a degree, and that will generate a good amount of power if you can use it the right way. There are a couple of things you should know. You're not white. You already have a culture that has created a history that is not very friendly to you. And in some ways, when I go to certain parts of, say, Roseville, I fall in the same category. So the task is a bit more difficult for you. Even if you have 20 PhDs, when you go to Safeway, they will look at you funny. So for that reason alone, you have to kind of make extra effort to create an image of yourself that differs from people who look like me and people who look like you. And we've talked about this before in the sense that in this class, for the longest time, not the longest time, but for some time in our history, the entire human race was divided into 3 or 4 different categories. At the very top, it was called Caucasoids. That's the white, the Caucasian culture. They consider themselves to be the most civilized, the most enlightened. They were saved by Jesus Christ, so they had a soul. They were civilized inside and out. The group of people below them were called Mongoloids, people who look like me. They're not black, they're not white, they're just brown. They're not civilized, they're barbarians. And the task of the civilized culture is to transform the barbarians into civilized. So what happens is that they come, for example, the white dominant culture enters my space, destroys my history, destroys my books, destroys my architecture, and replaces them with what they think to be civilized and appropriate. Now, it's a software that's alien to me. Okay? But I will never be allowed to walk in their society. And even if I do walk, I'm not really accepted. Then below me are this other group of people called Negroids. They're not civilized, they're not barbarians, they're savages. And I point this out, and it's no longer effective, they say, but I think if you understand, what history does to people and the categories it creates, you realize that for you to be considered civilized, you have to make a hell of a lot of effort. So if you find, for example, the people in your own group speak a certain way, dress a certain way, you have to do the exact opposite. Does that mean that you lose yourself? Yeah, for a few minutes you have to. Once you have gained enough power in life, whether it's money or education, then you can make your life the way you see fit. But until then, have a good amount of respect for the dominant culture. It will destroy you. And you can think that I'm an awful human being. Fine. At the end of the day, I have to issue you a grade. If you misbehave, you will fail. You will not graduate. And you keep doing this nonsense, you'll be 35 and you won't have a degree and your job is at Home Depot. And you are a biological animal. You will have sex, you will get someone pregnant, you will have a child. But they can't survive on a 9 to 5, $20 an hour. Life is expensive. So, what else do you want to talk about? Yeah.
This might not be the appropriate place for this question, but do you have hope for Palestine?
It's a difficult question. It's difficult because you're dealing with religion, you're dealing with politics, you're dealing with the Middle East that has a good amount of resources, and those resources can't be used by its own people. So you have a lot of Western influences. You also have imagine you go home tonight and there you are with your companion, and all of a sudden someone breaks down the door, walks in, pushes all of you guys out, throws out your stuff, and says, you can never return here. First, you want to understand why this is happening. You've been living in this, say, apartment for the past 25, 30 years. Or maybe it's just your own house. You've grown lots of trees in the backyard, you have vegetables, you have animals. This is your space, and you've had it for a long time. Maybe you got it through your parents. So it has a rich history. Now I come in there and I throw you out, and you want to fight me. What are you going to fight me with? It's like the Native Americans. I have guns, you have bows and arrows. You don't stand a chance. Now what's going to happen is my definition of justice is going to be very different than your definition of justice. I'm going to create laws. I'm going to legislate, make it lawful for the things I have done. And then because I have power, you have to kind of abide by the laws that I have created. Add to it the fact that, like trauma, you can't legislate laws to get rid of trauma. It doesn't work that way. Trauma is historical, especially if its history goes back centuries. So you have in the blood of Palestinians, you have in the blood of Middle Easterners, this negative outlook towards Westerners, whether you're French, whether you're English, or whether you're American. There is something to be said about, Westerners being somewhat exotic. But aside from that, these are the forces who entered certain environments and demolished them, claimed ownership to them and their resources. So is there hope for the Palestinians? Probably not. Does that mean that you should just let things be the way they are and allow them to kind of diminish even more? No, there are some people who are social activists, and they do what they can, It's really not my area of interest. All I know is that when you're dealing with people with historical traumas, it's going to be very, very difficult, to bring about peace. And you certainly can't legislate it. It's impossible. I've lived here for 40 years. There is a political organization around the world. Their name is Mujahideen. Mujahid means to struggle. And this is an organization that was formed around the 1970s or 60s, late 60s. And their task, and their leftist group, they were introduced to a good amount of leftist philosophy, Marxist philosophy. Hello, Michelle. And so, with the help of another guy who had his PhD in sociology from Sorbonne in France, they got together and they created an uprising against the Shah. The Shah was demolished, Khomeini came into power. Now, for the past maybe 40 years, they've been out. Their leaders have been out. And for the past 40 years, they've been saying to the rest of us Persians who are outside of the country that soon the regime will be toppled. Then we can return. I don't want to go back to Iran. There is nothing for me there. I've lived most of my life outside of my country. So am I going to be brainwashed by some fantastic slogan that there'll be peace and equality and justice? You know. So it's always good to kind of figure out where you are. This is where you are. You're not in Palestine unless you wish to go there. There was a movie by Edward Norton, I think. It's called The Painted Veil, or The Veil of Paintedness. I think it's the veil of paint, or something. It's about this doctor who goes to certain parts of Africa, or maybe Asia, to kind of eradicate certain diseases. He has a wife who sleeps around. She's very unfaithful to him. It's only near the end she comes to realize his sacrifice. He passes away, he dies. She comes back to, I guess she goes back to England. And it is true that if you were to devote your life to, say, the Palestinian cause, you may be able to maybe rescue a village. If not the village, maybe you can rescue a community of 10 people. If you think that's how you want to live your life, it's good. There's nothing wrong with it. I think if you're able to find any meaning to your life that's healthy, it's okay.
That's the follow-up.
You know, I was 14 or maybe 13 when I went back home from India to Iran. And it was the revolution. Guns and soldiers and people marching. It was fantastic to be young and to be marching every single day with tens of thousands of people screaming and shouting and fighting for justice and equality. The regime was toppled. The new regime came about 2-3 months later. Power was now in the hands of those who were uneducated. And so they have been the most cruel for the past 40 years, more cruel than the Shah. But in the past 40 years, there have been about 4 or 5 different uprisings. We have, hello Julian, the few times that I've been there, we joined some of the uprising. My mom joined, she got batoned, she got hit in the face. And what you discover in these uprisings is that life is this tyrannical force. Life is there to abuse and harass you on a daily basis. The majority of people in power are profoundly uneducated. The majority of people in power are very egocentric, okay? And human nature desires power, demands power, enjoys power, gets drunk by power. So what you have then, whenever there's an uprising, you have an icon or a figure who comes out and gives the people who are held hostage a message of hope. And it inspires the people, and the people jump in the streets and they're willing to sacrifice. And one of the nice things about mass movements is that, you know, when you're just walking around, it's your life, it's your desires, your pursuits, and your life is very, very small. It's really quite insignificant. It's like a tiny fish in the ocean. But all of a sudden what happens with an uprising is all these tiny little fish come together. And when you look at this group of fish from far away, they look like this gigantic whale. And the sharks will simply swim away. And so what happens when you join a mass movement, your insignificance, your pathetic individuality disappears. Now you hide within the masses. And if, for example, you want Cheerios and I want ice cream and our desires differ and we part ways, in a mass movement, everybody has the same voice, everybody has the same desire. And it's one of the best illusions that you can ever experience in life. It's beautiful because you disappear. And That's one of the things that all of us in this class desire, which is you want to have an experience, you want to have a pleasure into which you can just disappear. And the shorter lived the desire, the more you come back up and you realize, oh, here I am again. What do I do now? The deeper the desire, the more intense the desire, the longer its life, the more you're going to kind of remain invisible to yourself. And we've had lots of people who end up in prison, get tortured, but because of the idea that they have, they're willing to sacrifice. Forgive me, in as much as I think it's a very noble thing to do, it is such a waste of time. Maybe I should say, it's not a path that I would take, but maybe you or you or you.
Is the nature of diaspora to create a new home or to eventually return?
There are a couple of things.
Over many generations.
As the generations go down the line, you feel less and less and less of what your parents felt about the community from which they were exiled. So what you have is your parents dealing with reality of certain things, and you having purchased those realities, but for you they're just theories. And you fight, but you fight shadows. You fight things you never experienced. You fight narratives that were given to you. They're not bad, you know. I suppose there is homesickness at all these different levels of existence. You know, some people can live in Palestine, they can live in Jerusalem, and they just don't feel at home. Some people are Palestinians, they travel many, many miles, end up in Jerusalem. At the end of the day, they want to go back home. That's where their home is. So you have people desiring different things, and for the most part, it depends what your pain is, what has been sold to you. And it doesn't need to be negative, you know. Yeah, I don't know much about politics. And when we get to Confucianism, we'll talk about that a little bit. Before I damaged my vocal cords, I wanted to be a singer, traditional Persian. And I remember having gone to Hussein's shop. He said, have you done any music? Yeah, well, give me a demo. Just don't sing too loudly because, you know, there's a pizza shop next door. We don't want to scare them. And so, and so I began to sing, and when it's done, he says, that was beautiful. And then he fell into silence, and I didn't know really what to tell him. I just waited and waited and waited. And then he said, okay, go home now, I'm busy. Okay. Years passed, and now I was like a bona fide student. I would go to his house like every single day, or to his shop. He would come to the car wash. And he said to me, do you remember that day when you came to the car wash? I mean, you came to the shop and you sang for me. I said, yeah. He said, while you were singing, I was hoping, or rather in his language, I was praying that your vocal cords would get damaged. Why? That's so mean. Because eventually they got damaged and had to get the nodules removed. He says, well, I wanted you to fall in love with the things I have fallen in love. Ideas, Sufism, self-knowledge. If you would have pursued music, you would have a love affair with music. There is nothing wrong with it, but you can be a very good musician, but you would lack self-knowledge. He said, I'm not a musician. I'm in the business of advertising self-knowledge. And I guess the point I'm trying to make is that if you go to a party of 10 or 15 or 20 people, every single human being you encounter, they're like a billboard. They're there to sell you things. Some person will sell you sex with no meaning. It's just a quickie. Some person will sell you sex with coffee afterwards. Some people will sell you conversation and then sex, but no monogamy. Some people will sell you conversation, okay? Maybe coffee, maybe dinner, maybe some more conversation, then sex, and then says, how about we get married? And the point I'm trying to make that all of us in this class are in the business of selling something. And what we're looking for, all of us, is we're looking for a victim. We're looking for a prey, someone who is receptive to buy what we are selling. Now, if you're at a party of a bunch of 18-year-olds, for the most part, they're going to be losers, okay? No, not you guys. You guys are all enlightened. If you go to a gathering where there are like 30-year-olds, well, of maybe the 10, 30-year-olds who are there, there are going to be 5 who have jobs, consistent jobs, which means that on days where they wake up and they don't feel like working, they understand the importance of money. They understand the importance of rent. So they make the sacrifice, and it is a huge sacrifice. They're not like one of those 18-year-olds that say, screw it, I'll just call my boss, tell him I quit. It doesn't work that way. So a 30-year-old becomes a bit more responsible. He knows what it means to sacrifice, when he needs to sacrifice. So there is more stability to a 30-year-old. But it doesn't mean that just because they're stable in a job, they can be stable in a relationship. So I guess the point I'm trying to make is when you ask questions, some of the questions and issues that we lament about have come from external sources. I mean, that's the reason why Plato or anyone who is in the business of reflection would argue that it takes many, 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 many years for you to kind of have a question that belongs to you, that you are the creator of the question, you know. I'm not Palestinian. I like them. They're my people. But that's not my question. That's not my interest. Now, if you were to come to my house and every single day feed me that question, like, why don't you join me and my community of people? We're going to go to Palestine and do A, B, C, D. I say, listen, good luck, you know. And that's one of the things that there is an offshoot of Islam. It's called Baha'ism. And what would happen in the Baha'i tradition, especially in Sacramento when the community was a bit smaller, the Baha'is would become friends with the Muslims, but they would pick and choose who they want to be friends with very, very closely. And what they would want to do is poke some holes in the belief system of the Muslim, and once enough holes have been created, one morning they hope that the Muslim will say, so Islam is really not that great. You say, well, yes, let me tell you what Baha'ism is. And all of a sudden they sell you their religion. And these are what we call friendships of utility, that I am here to sell you something, and once I sell you the merchandise, and once you buy it, once you become needy for it, then I'm out, you know. So the question is, to whom you're going to fall victim? That's what this class is. All of you come to this class having been victimized by various forms of advertisement, parental, social, political. And my job is to poke holes into all of them and sell you the product that I have. And the only way you will purchase any product if it's need-based, that'll last for a long time. If you're interested, that interest will disappear after a while. So, anyone else? Yeah.
Is there ever a good reason to stop that cycle if we're all just being victimized all the time by society or politics or just rush the outcome?
Well, it's something that we'll talk about tonight as we approach Taoism, because one of the principles in Taoism is one of emptiness. In other words, if you want to be filled with something, you have a bottle on your desk and it is filled with water, presumably. Now, I have a cup of coffee, and let's say I want to give you coffee. Now, I can wrestle with you for the next 5 hours until you agree for me to pour in your cup, in your bottle, a drop of coffee. But a drop of coffee will eventually become invisible in that big bottle of yours. What I really want to do is give you a taste of this coffee. And the only way it can happen is at a certain point, either by force, either you willingly grabbing your bottle, removing the top, pouring out the water, coming to me, or telling me, Amir, can you come over and pour some coffee into my bottle? And then I will pour the coffee in your bottle. Now when you drink it, it's just coffee. You know. Now, it's going to be very, very difficult because it's not just water that we're talking about. I'm talking about these days you have gender issues, you have social issues, you have parental issues, you have all these issues that live inside you. If they're not issues, they're desires that you have, they're ambitions that you have, they're hopes and dreams that you have. And it's very difficult to get rid of all of those things. There is one easy way. That easy way takes a good amount of cunningness, you know. Sometimes it happens organically, intuitively, and sometimes it happens through the course of time, that you have to spend some time with someone for 5, 6, 7, 9, 10 weeks or months or years, until one day, one morning you wake up and you say, oh, I don't think I can survive without them. Now, the moment you say, I don't think I can survive without them, you have a huge power disparity. Here you are, weak, in need of this person, and here is this person. They may or may not need you. That, is unknown. But the moment you're down here, you need them. What they will do is give you what they have, and you will receive. Now, oftentimes, of course, when you and I fall in love, you're 18, you go somewhere, you fall in love with an idiot. And after a few weeks, all you have is a headache. And that's not worth, pursuing. That there are certain colors that when you leave them in the sun, they will eventually disappear. But there are certain colors that regardless of how long they stay in the sun, their color will remain. The sun has no power over them. And that's what I guess Rumi is talking about, that there are certain kinds of love that time, space have no power over. But most often we are victimized by our desires that are unexamined, unreflected upon, and so we pursue them, and in the end we realize we made a mistake. So can the cycle end? Absolutely. Yeah, we'll talk about that tonight. Anyone else? Julian, yes.
Is there any type of friendship beyond the utilized friendship?
The what?
Like utilized friendship, where two people are only friends when they use each other? is there anything like can a friendship be beyond that?
Yeah, most of our friendships are friendships of pleasure and friendships of utility. And in utility, there is a good amount of pleasure. Look, I'll give you two examples. You could be friends with Snoop Dogg. Nothing wrong with that. He'll take you to places. He'll teach you how to rap. He'll teach you how to roll a joint. He'll teach you various things. Or you could hang out with Malcolm X. He will also give you pleasure. The problem with the pleasure given to you by Malcolm X is that it demands a good amount of reflection, observation, that creates a good amount of pain. You witness a lot of things that are uncomfortable, painful. But once your skin thickens, once you realize reflecting and witnessing certain things that are the bringers or creators of pain, they're not as painful as I thought them to be. They actually inspire me to become a social activist, for example. And then what happens is, yes, you're being used by Snoop Dogg, you're also being used by Malcolm. Now, you don't really need to have much capacity to hang out with Snoop Dogg. You just have to make sure that when you smoke a joint, for example, you don't throw up. That when you do smoke, when you go home, and if your mom smells that stuff on you, she's going to be okay because she too is an addict. Okay? If on the other hand, you're dealing with Malcolm, you really need to have a capacity to go into the mud and come out and be okay. You know? So, and I borrow this from one of my good friends, Aristotle. You know, we are seekers of pleasure, but as you mature your definition of pleasure and you begin to desire specific kinds of pleasure. I'll tell you a story. I had a student about, 20 some odd years ago. She had a daughter, she had two daughters. One of her daughters had some disabilities from birth. The other was okay. When you have a sibling who is disabled, you feel bad for having fun. You feel bad for eating comfortably. It's what they call survivor's guilt. You know, why is she this way and why am I this way? And what you realize is that you have been with your disabled sister for the past 10, 15 years, and her disability has impacted you psychologically. Now, there are some negative components to it, there are some positive components to it. You're not going to find ridiculous entertainments very enjoyable because your sister has kind of, destroyed that for you. So what you do is, because you've been taking care of your disabled sister for the past many, many years, what happens is you begin to go out and have relationships, but with people who have disabilities, because that's the only world you know. So you go out with someone who drinks too much. You go out with someone who smokes too much. You go out with someone who has some trauma on the inside. Because that is what has become of you. That's what history has created for you, So you can't deal with people who are healthy and put together well. So you only go out with people who are broken. And these are not like people broken in the right way. Life breaks them. And these are the worst kinds of people you want to hang out with. And by that, all of us are broken by life, but some people are really traumatized by life, and it's very difficult to bring them out. It's like dealing with an alcoholic. You need to have the patience of Job, if he was patient at all, some many years ago. Because how long can you really endure and forgive and exercise compassion for a spouse who drinks excessively and comes home and hits you and abuses you verbally, emotionally, physically? Okay. So I guess the point ultimately is that pick and choose the pleasures, but you're far too young and you lack the experience. So let someone else pick and choose pleasures for you. If, for example, you were to come to my office and say, Amir, I want to do business, but I also like these ideas, I will do whatever I can to make sure that you double major. And to manipulate you even further, I will have you come to the house. I will have you come to the office. I will make sure you text me and email me on a regular basis so our relationship can kind of just grow. And then you will have respect for me and my ideas. I don't want your money. I don't want your body. I don't care for your life. While I have you, I want to make sure that the desires that live inside me can be transferred into you. I have been 18, but you've never been 60. So I have a 4-year advantage over you. So, anyone else? Julian?
You talk about the fear of commitment.
You don't fear commitment when you enjoy something intensely. In other words, when you're emotionally entangled, when you feel intensely and deeply for someone, you are fully committed. In fact, when you are in fact in love and you're walking around the lake, and let's just say you are a heterosexual man, and you're walking around the lake and there are all these attractive women coming your way, there's a good chance you're not going to look at them. And if you do, you're going to feel guilty. The emotions, the feelings you have for this other person, by default, they make you monogamous. They make you loyal. They make you committed, even if the other person doesn't like you as much. Okay? Now, what happens is after the emotions dissipate, they lose their intensity, you begin to realize that there are some wrinkles in the relationship. There are some attributes, some qualities about your companion that you don't like, you're not pleased with. They don't give you pleasure. So now reflection comes in. Because remember, first you feel, you go into the relationship, okay, and then all of a sudden reality hits. There are some issues in the relationship. Now the Messiah, your intellect, comes down to figure out, okay, what do I do with all these issues? Okay, and you try, it doesn't work. You try again, it doesn't work, and you don't walk away. You don't walk away because you're emotionally entangled. And even though at times your reflective abilities say, Julian, walk away, this is no good, that particular awareness and observation will last for you about maybe 5 minutes, maybe 5 hours. Eventually you will pick up your phone. Eventually you will call or text. You will go over. You will take her to Indian food, House of Naan and Curries. You will have chicken tikka masala. And you guys will sit and talk about your issues. And she says, I'm sorry. You say, oh, I'm sorry too. And then the both of you go under the covers. You do whatever you do. You wake up, things are good. 10 minutes later, the same issues appear. So, as long as you're having fun, your intellect is on pause. You don't think. You're governed by your emotions. The moment pain appears, then you begin to think. And if you don't have the resources, your emotions kind of grow bigger and bigger and bigger until they're no longer tolerable. Yeah. So, anyone else? Joyce?
You have to be empty to listen.
We have a relative. He has his PhD in, I guess, business management. He was an editor of a newspaper back home. He teaches here. He said he's about 70 or so. He said a lot of life experiences. He is the dragon we talked about last night. He was once a child, innocent, naive, simple. Desired simple things. His ambitions were simple. He became a teenager, and then he had the avalanche of society on his shoulders. He enjoyed social status because some of his friends were very rich, money-wise. We see him often. He has zero respect for people, especially people who oppose him. You know, one of the nice things about being in the presence of death or being really, really depressed, but forget depression because that has a variety of different branches, but what death does, especially if you have come from a culture that is somewhat reflective, first, imagine I'm your dad and she's your mom. You come home and you are seeing her sob, cry. What happened? Your father, Amir, died. Well, let's just say our relationship has been very good for the past few years. So you two kind of cry. It's a shock to your system. You get really sad and depressed. You look at your mom. She makes you even more sad and depressed. But death does something really interesting. At first, your attention is outward. My father is gone. My mom is sad. My mom is old. Who's going to take care of my mom? What am I going to do without a father? And then after a while, your attention goes inward because death hollows you from inside. If death can come about at any time, without any notice, without any warning, doesn't text you, doesn't call you, then what should I do that's meaningful? And there are these moments you have in the presence of death where there is nothing out there that makes your life meaningful. It's like you've been hollowed from inside. And you try to grasp, anything out there that will kind of help you pull yourself up, but there is nothing out there. And the point I'm trying to make is that you begin to kind of think about this stuff and feel about this stuff only when you have a force that just hollows you from within. And when you're hollowed or emptied from within, then you have the capacity to receive. Let me give you perhaps a different example that may be more practical. Imagine that, God forbid, Joaquin is your boyfriend. God forbid. And imagine, God forbid, you're attracted to Julian, but you have a boyfriend. Okay. Good morning, Chris. How are you? Now, you have been with Joaquin Phoenix here for about 5 years. That's a lot of history you have with him. You are full. He likes you. When he says hello, instead of saying hello back, you put your hand up and you say, you see this? It's not this, it's this. I'm engaged. Don't say hello to me. And he says, it was just a very casual, friendly hello. And he changes the tone of his voice. I was just saying, hello. And they say, oh, okay, I get it. Hello back to you. And then the following day, he sits a little closer. What are you drawing? What are you doing this? What are you doing that? And then let's just say there's a break at like about 7:30. Can I buy you a cup of coffee? Now remember, 5 years of being with Joaquin Phoenix, you're full of him. You don't have any space for a new guy. But as he approaches you, as the two of you begin to interact, something really strange begins to happen. Without you being aware, there is a brand new space that's now created inside you. You have 90% of him, now you have 10% of him. As he talks to you some more about various things, he begins to occupy more space. 20%, then 30%, then 50%, then 60%. Then one morning you wake up and you realize you don't want to be with Joaquin Phoenix anymore. He has 99.9% of you. And then at that stage, you look at Joaquin and say, Joaquin, listen, you know I love you. But you must know I'm not in love with you. And I'm an American. I want to be in love. So, I am out. You go to him. All of life is about space. Every form of advertisement out there is competing to grab some space inside you. And like cancer, it wants to spread.